Hi, I'm Rabbi Josh Rose, founder and director of Collab Reimagine Jewish. And in just a few hours, Shabbat will come upon us, as will Purim. And I wanted just to share a message about Purim as we go into it. Maybe the most complicated relationship to Purim that we've experienced in some years. Let me explain. And I wanted to just share my own thinking, my own thoughts on what this day might mean at such a fraught time for the Jewish people. So first of all, what is Purim? Purim is recognized as a day of celebration and merrymaking and fun and zaniness and costumes and drink and food. And really at the heart of it is joy. And so we might ask reasonably at this time, with still in the shadow of the horrific attacks of October 7th and in the increasingly painful and agonizing news about the impact of the war on Gaza and on its civilians, what does it mean to be just abandoning everything and celebrating with joy? How do we find joy in a moment like this? And to that very reasonable question, I can only say that I wrestle with it too, and I think a lot of us are going to have some sense of ambivalence as we celebrate Purim this year. But I also want to point out that we know that during the Shoah, like in the Warsaw Ghetto and even in the camps, people celebrated Purim because there's something about the affirmation. There's something that we're saying, even in a world, or especially in a world as broken and as agonized as this. Even here, I will insist on finding joy. But that means that the joy that we find on Purim must not be the kind of joy that's an escapist joy, where it's joy that we're tapping into because we're hiding our head in the sand or we're looking away. That would be profoundly un-Jewish. It's got to be a world-aware joy that says, I know the state of the world. I know the responsibility upon me and on other people to fix it and to be agents of change in this world. And my life must also have carefree, joyous moments within it. That's how I will make sense of the abandon of that night of Purim. The other thing that I want to say is that the story of Purim has a special resonance and a profound resonance that's quite complicated and nuanced. And so I hope you'll indulge me as I try to think through some of my thoughts about, as I articulate some of my thoughts about Purim. So the story that's at the center of Purim is the Book of Esther, Megillat Esther, the Scroll of Esther. And it's in part of the Hebrew Bible, and it's unlike anything else in the entire Hebrew Bible. And the story turns on a couple of really, really key themes. One is what we would now call anti-Semitism. That's really the animating idea in the story. And the wicked Haman, who's an agent of the king, wants to destroy the Jewish people. Why does he want to destroy the Jewish people? Because Mordechai, who's a Jewish person within the kingdom, refuses to bow before him. Haman is so incensed by the refusal of this Jew and people like him to his refusal to recognize his authority, that he decides to destroy the Jewish people. And so one of the things that comes up for me is, in a moment of increased anti-Semitism in the United States and globally, there's an inclination, I know from many Jewish people I've spoken with, that I can't judge, but an inclination to sort of hide and go quietly, and this is not the time to pronounce our Jewishness. And to that I say, no, this is a story that reminds us that we should be proud and we should be Jewish and we should wear our Yiddishkeit, our Jewishness, on our sleeves. Just as we would say to anybody who's proud of their own legacy and heritage, that they should be themselves fully out there. This is not a time for Jews to hide or to succumb to fear. The dangers and the realities of anti-Semitism are very real, and I'm not denying that. But it's precisely in those moments where we want to feel and pronounce our Jewish pride. Um, and the story turns on the way that Haman is defeated is because of choices of individual personal courage. Individual personal courage. Mordecai, his act of courage is to defy Haman. And then the other key player, who's really the main hero, I think, in the story of the Book of Esther, is Queen Esther. And the reason I find this so inspiring is that Queen Esther herself has to go through this process. Initially, she's kind of passing. Her king and the court are unaware that she's Jewish, and Mordecai awakens in her the sense of solidarity, of Jewish solidarity, which is another critical part of the story. And she decides to pronounce herself as a Jewess, as a Jewish person, and through a series of through narrative mechanisms in the story and through her own courage and her wisdom and her cleverness, she saves the Jewish people, and the wicked Haman is destroyed. And so it becomes the story of not only of a cautionary tale about anti-Semitism and a story about personal courage, but also a story about Jewish pride and all of those things coming together. And I want to say that those are beautiful and inspiring vibrations that we can take from the story of Esther, and to allow them to inspire us even at such a difficult time. The other thing I want to say, and this is where things get a little more intense and real, and I hope that you'll bear with me and breathe through this if I say things that are challenging to you. And I'm just offering my own thoughts. But the other thing that the story is about is that this is a story that is about the Jewish people in exile. It's written after Jerusalem had been conquered and Jews had to flee. Many Jews remained in Jerusalem and Israel, but Jews were now scattered throughout. So it's a story about exile. It takes place in Persia, ancient Persia. And it's written by Jews in exile. And so it's a story very much of exile, which is to say that it is a story about Jewish statelessness and Jewish powerlessness. And to me, living in this era in which the status of Israel and Israel's legitimacy and Israel's right to exist has been called into question. To me, this is a story that's this heartbreaking call that comes from a state of powerlessness, and is a cautionary tale about the dangers of Jewish statelessness and powerlessness. Just like every other people on the planet ought to have a right to return to their indigenous home, so too should the Jewish people have a right to govern themselves in their indigenous home. And obviously that's not uncomplicated, because Jews are not the only people who are indigenous to the land of Israel. And I think any accounting of modern Israel must recognize that and to address it. But in the meantime, this is a story about Jewish powerlessness and the anxieties and the dangers that come with it. When I was growing up in North America, Jewish power and anti-Semitism were not things that I had to put a lot of thought into, because it seemed at that time that anti-Semitism was on the wane, certainly outside of the state where I lived in Portland, Oregon, and outside of the state of Israel, which certainly faced immense dangers. But elsewhere, I wasn't anxious being a Jewish person at that time. But now there is tremendous anti-Semitism on the rise in North America and globally. And to me, any account of what's happening in the world that does not address the reality of anti-Semitism and the dangers of Jewish statelessness and powerlessness, I don't find morally credible. And so for me, it's also an exile story. And the reason for the celebration is that Jews came through that with safety, through the Book of Esther and its tale, with safety, and we're here today. The other thing that makes this story so challenging is that the 9th chapter of the Book of Esther is really a story of Jewish vengeance. And the Jews, having been brought to safety because of the acts of Queen Esther, are now in a situation where they want to exact revenge on their oppressors and people throughout the countryside of the country where in Persia. Um, and even under normal circumstances, this is a profoundly troubling passage to read, stomach churning, really, to have in one of our books. And it's there. It's part of our text. And the question is, how do we make sense of it? One of the responses to it historically has been some kind of apologetics or reinterpretation or justification, or saying, well, it was under these circumstances, and or reinterpretations of it, or whispering through the text as though somehow to take away its power when we read it out loud. But what I want to say is that I think we have to confront these passages and realize that precisely because they come to us in a story that is about Jewish powerlessness and vulnerability, that we have to read them as though on the other side of this important mile marker, this important monument, which is the establishment of Jewish political power with the founding of the State of Israel, and to say, we are no longer a people powerless. We're no longer a people whose naive fantasies about how to correct the trauma of being a subjugated people might be acted out in this chapter 9. We're no longer that people. We can no longer indulge in the kind of fantasies of revenge, and we need not, because we have the power of a state and a military that is there to protect the Jewish and the non-Jewish citizens of the State of Israel. And so if the Purim story is a story of Jewish powerlessness, then our challenge in our day is the responsibility of Jewish power. One of the things that I'd want to say to the broader Jewish community is that we live at a time of great divisiveness within the Jewish community, as I think that we all know. This is not a time to marginalize the serious and the reasonable voices who are raising questions about Israel's response in Gaza. There are people listening to this who feel quite comfortable with Israel's response in Gaza and feel that Israel has a responsibility to its citizens, has a responsibility to the hostages who are there, and who lay the blame at the feet of Hamas. And I'm not here to debate that. I'm troubled by Israel's response. I'm thinking through it. I'm reading what I can. I'm troubled by it. But my larger point is not to convince you of that, but rather to say that we must not silence or marginalize those voices who are serious voices and reasonable voices within the Jewish community who are raising questions about the use of Jewish power and the procedures of contemporary Jewish life as Jews adjust to the relatively historically new reality of having a Jewish state. This is not a time to silence voices that represent the deep humanity of the Jewish tradition. This is a time for communal thoughtfulness, for communal engagement. This is also a time, I would say to everyone, to make sure that what we're articulating in social media and in the conversations we have are reasonable, that we should all be very well informed, and that the responsibility, whether we live in the diaspora or whether we live in Israel, is our responsibility to take very, very seriously the charge of the legacy of the Jewish people's powerlessness, and now in the current state of the modern world in which Jews do have a state, to take to take with full responsibility of what we might say is Jewish citizenship, and that is to say, being members of the modern Jewish world and inheritors of the Jewish legacy. So I hope that in all of that churning difficulty and discomfort, that we can find Jewish unity, not uniformity of belief, but unity in our celebration of being able to have come through what we've come through, of being proud of our Jewishness, of being proud of our Jewish solidarity. And then finally, I think of being proud of what I believe is a universal message in the Purim story, which is that we're always on the side of those who are subjugated and without power. that is always essential and central to the Jewish mission. That we learn not only from our Jewish teachers, we learn that from God in the Torah. God is always on the side of the oppressed, and the prophets warn us that if we become too comfortable with power and too comfortable with misusing it and look away from a world of justice, then we've lost connection with our source, with the source of redemption. And so for me, the story of Purim, the story of the Book of Esther, is a universal story of overcoming those who want to do violence to those who are vulnerable and oppressed. And because that ultimately is the legacy of the experience of Jewish history, is learning from our subjugation to bring goodness and healing and unity to a world very much in need of it. So with that very, very heavy message, I want to send you into Purim and into Shabbat with a heart full of goodness and wishes for joy. The synagogues will be celebrating tonight and tomorrow with the reading of the Megillah, the Book of Esther, and then on Saturday, a week from tomorrow, March 30th, is CoLab's OutRighteous Purim celebration, March 30th at 7 p.m. I'm just going to say, I think it's the greatest Purim party in Portland. It might even be the greatest party in Portland. But in any event, to find out more about it, you can go to colabpdx.org/events. That's colabpdx.org/events. Or if you're just ready right now to get your tickets, then you can go to events.humanitix.com/Purim2024. That's events.humanitix.com/Purim2024. And I wish you a Shabbat Shalom and thank you. If you have issue with what I said, or you want to talk further about it, or you want to challenge or just commiserate, you can send an email to Rabbi Josh at colabpdx.org, and we can talk. Thanks so much. Take care.